Andre Webb had built an empire out of nothing but grit and refusal. Trucks, warehouses, contracts that stretched from coast to coast. But on this particular Tuesday, none of that mattered. All he wanted was to see his daughter's face light up over a school lunch tray. He didn't wear a suit. No driver waited outside, just jeans, a faded company polo, and a grin he'd been carrying since he left the office early. Nia was 10. Nia loved surprises, and Andre loved being the one who gave them to her. The school had cost him more than he ever let on. Not just in tuition, though that number alone would make most men wince. It cost him in meetings where he had to prove again and again that his daughter belonged there. It cost him in polite smiles from other parents who'd never quite looked him in the eye. But he'd done it. For her. Because he wanted Nia to have doors he never had. He walked through the front entrance, signed in at the front desk, and made his way toward the cafeteria, following the noise of clattering trays and kids' laughter bouncing off the walls. His heart was already smiling before his face caught up. Then he heard it. Just outside the cafeteria doors, tucked near the supply closet, a lunch lady and a teacher's aide were talking low. The way people talk when they think no one important is listening. "That scholarship girl again," one of them said. "Not unkind, but not kind either. Just careless, the way you'd talk about a stray cat that kept wandering onto the property." "I still don't understand how she got in," the other one added. "I mean, don't get me wrong, she's sweet. But you know how it is. They let a few in every year. Got to fill some kind of quota, I guess." Andre stopped walking. His hand, still halfway reaching for the cafeteria door, froze in the air like it had hit glass. The sound of children eating and laughing behind that door suddenly felt very far away, like it was happening in another world. A soft, warm world Nia was still lucky enough to live in. He wasn't naive. He knew what these rooms sounded like when men who looked like him weren't supposed to be listening. He'd heard it in boardrooms before he ever owned one. He'd heard it from bank loan officers who looked at his numbers, then looked at his face, then found a reason to say no. He knew this language. He'd been fluent in it since he was younger than Nia was now. But hearing it here, about his daughter, in a place he'd fought so hard to get her into, hit different. It didn't come as a shock. It came as an old, familiar ache, the kind that never fully leaves, it just goes quiet for a while. He could have opened that door right then. He could have let his voice fill that hallway the way his presence usually filled a room. But something told him to wait. Something told him there was more to hear before there was anything to say. So Andre Webb, CEO, father, a man who had shaken hands with senators and closed deals worth more than some towns' annual budgets, did something small and quiet instead. He stepped back into the shadow of the doorway. He slid his phone into his pocket, the surprise for Nia forgotten for now. And he listened. The two women kept talking, not knowing the ground had shifted just a few feet away from them. "Have you seen her hair today?" one of them said, half laughing. "I mean, it's a lot. Somebody needs to tell her mum this is a school, not a runway." Andre's jaw tightened. Nia's hair was the same hair her grandmother wore proud and high in old photographs he kept in his office drawer. The same hair Nia spent Sunday nights getting braided, sitting between her mother's knees, giggling through the tugging and the parting, because it meant she got to feel pretty and cared for all at once. Now here it was, a punchline in a hallway. "And that attitude," the other one added. I asked her a simple question in class, and she looked at me like I'd insulted her. These kids come in here thinking they can just talk back. Andre knew that look. He'd worn that look himself, more times than he could count. It wasn't attitude. It was armor. It was a child, 10 years old, already learning that she had to hold her spine straighter than the other kids just to be seen as calm instead of difficult. "I just don't think she fits in with this crowd," the first one murmured. "Sweet girl, but this isn't really her environment, if you know what I mean." He knew exactly what she meant. He'd heard versions of that sentence his entire life, dressed up in different tones, spoken by different mouths, but always landing the same place. His mind pulled him backward, past the hallway, past the years, all the way back to a classroom in a school that never wanted him there either. He was maybe 8 years old, the only black boy in a room full of white faces, and he remembered raising his hand to answer a question, only to watch his teacher's eyes flick with something between surprise and suspicion when he got it right, as if right wasn't supposed to come from him. He remembered being tested more than the other kids, watched more closely, given less benefit of any doubt. He remembered his mother, coming home some nights barely able to keep her eyes open, her uniform from the diner still smelling like grease and coffee, her second job waiting for her in just a few hours. She never complained in front of him. She just checked his homework at the kitchen table, her hands rough, her voice soft, telling him that being twice as good was not fair, but it was necessary. He didn't understand it then. He understood it now, standing in this hallway, watching history repeat itself in his daughter's life. The pain wasn't something new that had just found him. It was old. It was inherited, passed down like a scar that skips a generation only to return sharper the next time. He looked through the small window in the cafeteria door, just enough to catch a glimpse of her. There she was. Nia, sitting alone at the end of a long table, other kids laughing in clusters around her, none of them looking her way. She wasn't crying. She wasn't causing a scene. She was just eating quietly, her shoulders slightly curled inward, her head down just enough to take up less space than she deserved to. She had learned to make herself small. Somewhere between home and this cafeteria, somewhere between her mother's laughter and these whispered judgments, his daughter had learned the same lesson he had learned decades ago. The lesson no parent ever wants to pass down, but so many are forced to anyway. All the success he had built, the company, the money, the doors he had kicked open with his own 2 hands, none of it had been enough to keep this moment from happening. He had given her everything he never had, and still here she was, carrying a weight he thought he had spent his whole life trying to lift. Standing there in that hallway, Andre Webb finally understood something with painful clarity. His success had never been armor. It had only ever been proof that he survived. Andre took a breath. The kind of breath a man takes when he has to choose his next move carefully, knowing it will matter for longer than this one afternoon. Then he stepped out of the shadow of the doorway and walked toward the 2 women. He didn't storm. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked the way he walked into every boardroom he had ever entered, shoulders back, steps even, like a man who already knew how this conversation would end. The lunch lady saw him first. Her face changed, that fast shift people make when they realize they've been overheard. The teacher's aide turned a second later, and Andre watched the color drain slightly from her cheeks. "Good afternoon," he said, calm, almost gentle. "I'm Andre Webb." Nia's father. Silence. The kind of silence that says more than any scream could. "I was on my way in to surprise my daughter for lunch," he continued, "and I couldn't help but hear part of your conversation. I just want to make sure I understood you correctly." Neither woman spoke. He let the quiet sit there for a moment, unhurried, because he understood something both of them were only beginning to realize, that his stillness was more unsettling than any anger could have been. "You mentioned a quota," he said. "Can you tell me more about that? I'd like to understand how many students here are on scholarship and how often they're discussed this way when they're not in the room." That's not. I didn't mean it like that," the aide stammered. "I think you did," Andre said, not cruelly, just honestly. "And that's all right. I'm not here to make you feel small. I just spent the last 10 minutes watching my daughter learn how to do that to herself, so I'd rather we talk about it plainly." The lunch lady looked at the floor. Andre kept his eyes steady, not on her shame, but on the moment itself, the moment he needed to hold on to with both hands. "Let me ask you something else," he said. "Does this school have a diversity training program? Something that goes beyond a poster in the front office?" There's a policy," the aide said quietly. "I don't know if I haven't gone through it recently." "That's useful to know," Andre said. "Because a policy that isn't practiced isn't a policy. It's decoration." He wasn't performing anger. He didn't need to. Every question he asked landed like a door being opened onto a room these two women clearly didn't want examined. He asked about how scholarship students were tracked, how complaints were handled, how often parents like him were looped into these conversations instead of finding out by accident, standing outside a cafeteria door. The aide's composure cracked further with each answer she couldn't fully give. The lunch lady, who had said far less, still stood frozen, understanding that her silence in that hallway had made her just as much a part of this as the words themselves. Through the small window in the cafeteria door, Nia had noticed him now. She sat up straighter, confusion crossing her face at first, then something else, something like recognition. She watched her father stand there, unshaken, unrazed, unbothered by the discomfort he was creating in people who had underestimated exactly who he was. She had never seen him like this before. Not angry, like the men on television. Not loud, like the arguments she sometimes heard about on the news. Just steady. Immovable. A man who didn't need volume to be powerful. Slowly, without even realizing she was doing it, Nia's shoulders pulled back. Her spine straightened. The same posture she had learned to shrink into now began, quietly, to rebuild itself, 1 inch at a time, just by watching her father refuse to become small in a moment that was built to shrink him. Andre finished his questions, his voice never once rising above a steady, even calm. "I'd like to speak with the administration about this," he said, "today, if possible. Not because I want anyone punished for the sake of it, but because my daughter deserves to eat her lunch in peace, and so does every other child in this building who didn't ask to be talked about behind a closed door." Neither woman answered right away. They didn't need to. Their silence had already told him everything. Then Andre turned, walked those last few steps to the cafeteria door, and pushed it open, ready now to be exactly what he came here to be. Her father. By the time the school day ended, word had already moved through the hallways the way these things always do, quietly at first, then all at once. Teachers spoke in lowered voices near the copy machine. Parents exchanged messages before pickup line even started. The administration called an emergency meeting before the last bus pulled away from the curb. Andre sat across from the principal that same afternoon, his voice calm the entire time, the same steady tone he had used in the hallway. He didn't ask for anyone to lose their job out of anger. He asked for real answers instead of comfortable apologies. He asked for an actual review of how scholarship students were treated, not just on paper, but in the quiet moments no one thought a parent would ever hear about. Within days, the school announced new mandatory training for staff, an anonymous reporting system for students, and a review board that included parents, not just administrators patting themselves on the back. The teacher's aide was quietly transferred to another position outside the building. No dramatic firing, no headlines, just a door closing the way doors often do when people are finally held accountable. But none of that was the real ending. Not for Andre. Not for Nia. That night, after her bath, after her homework, after the house had gone quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, Andre sat on the edge of Nia's bed. She was still processing the day. He could see it in the way she kept glancing at him, waiting for an explanation that made sense of everything. So he gave her one. He told her for the first time in her whole life about the classroom he grew up in. The one where a teacher's eyes changed the moment he answered a question correctly. He told her about being tested more than the other kids, watched more closely, given less patience for the same mistakes everyone else made without consequence. He told her about his mother, her uniform smelling like the diner, her hands rough from double shifts, her voice steady every single night at that kitchen table, no matter how tired she was. "I never wanted you to carry what I carried," he said. "That's why I built everything I built. Not for the house, not for this school, not even for the company. I built it so you could walk into rooms without having to shrink yourself first." Nia was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked him something that caught him off guard. "Did it work?" she asked. "Did building all that make it stop happening?" Andre didn't answer right away because he wanted to give her the truth, not a comforting lie. "No," he finally said. "It didn't stop it from happening. But it did something else. It made sure that when it did happen, you'd have someone standing right behind you, ready to walk through that door." She leaned into him then, and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been tight since that hallway. His success had never been a shield strong enough to keep the world's ugliness away from his daughter completely. But it had become something else, something steadier. Proof that a man could face all of that and still stand up straight at the end of the day. Proof that dignity doesn't disappear under pressure. It survives it. Weeks passed. The school settled into its new routines, the ones that actually meant something this time. And on an ordinary Tuesday, much like the one that started all of this, Andre walked Nia into that same cafeteria for lunch. This time, she didn't hang back. This time, her shoulders stayed square, her chin level, her voice sure when she greeted the other kids at her table. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't disappearing into herself to avoid being noticed. She was simply there, fully, unapologetically there. Andre watched her from a few steps away, the same spot near the doorway where everything had changed weeks earlier. He didn't need to say anything else. Watching her walk into that room unafraid said everything he could never have put into words alone. This was never about revenge. It was never about proving a point or winning an argument in a school hallway. It was about making sure that the next time his daughter walked into a room, she carried her grandmother's pride in her hair, her great-grandmother's strength in her spine, and her father's unshaken calm in her voice, without ever once needing to make herself smaller for anyone. My name is Simmons, and this has been a story from Chronicles of Black. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your own life, someone who had to be twice as strong just to be seen as equal, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments below. Share the moment that stayed with you. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told and remembered, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories waiting, stories of struggle, stories of dignity, and stories of the quiet, unshakable strength that refuses to be erased. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening all the way to the end.